Hey guys, welcome back to Reignited and welcome back to our 392 Hemi Swapped C10 project that I'm calling Identity Crisis. Now in this episode, we got to get stuck into our manual transmission swap, which means giving this thing a third pedal. Let's get into it. So now we have to move on into the interior, and one of the things we're going to have to do is convert this truck from an automatic to a manual transmission. So that means the addition of a third pedal. Now what I did was I went ahead and got an entire pedal assembly from the Challenger, and I thought originally I was going to just try to swap this whole entire setup in here, but it's just not going to work. I was looking at it a little bit closer, and the pedals themselves jog quite a bit this way to clear for the small footwell in the Challenger. I don't need them to jog at all in this vehicle. And then also, it's just not the base plate here. There was no good way to do it. So rather what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and modify the existing pedal box in here to adapt for the additional clutch pedal on the side. And then I'm going to cut off the pedal assembly on the bottom here and weld on this pedal assembly. So that way I'll still have the Challenger look with these actual foot pedals on there. And then that way I can go ahead and bolt up my gas pedal here. This is of course the important bit as well, because I do have electronic throttle on here. So go ahead and mount this guy up. I think once it's all in there and cut and everything, it's gonna look great. Once I get the pedal box completely modified and back in there, I can get the steering column back in, and then I can start cutting up the rest of the interior. But I kind of need to get those items done before I go any further. So it's not a small project. This is definitely a big project. So let's go ahead and get started with cutting up this stock pedal box. Now somebody has already torched out the opening here, I think because of the aftermarket dash that they slapped in there. I shouldn't say aftermarket, I should say different vehicle entirely dash they swapped in there, but the cuts aren't exactly the cleanest thing. So I'm gonna go ahead and start by cleaning up these cuts, make this thing look a little bit better, and then I'm gonna figure out exactly how I'm going to adapt the clutch pedal on there. So hope you guys stick with me. Okay, so essentially what my plan is I'm going to build an additional box right off the side of this here for the clutch pedal to reside. So I'm gonna have to cut away some of this material here so that the clutch pedal has some actual free play in here. I don't think I can pack it up too much here with actual metal. I don't wanna put too much here because I think there's some other stuff here that it could hit. But I can definitely add on the box for the pedal, and we'll see just how much of this I have to cut away to let it swing freely. Now I also have to mount the clutch master cylinder, and my hope was that I'd be able to mount it in line with the pedal on the outside of the Firewall, but it kind of looks like it's going to contact the brake booster assembly. So I'm gonna have to get everything in place first and then start figuring out how to mount that master cylinder. If nothing else, I could probably mount it inside the vehicle because it looks like there's going to be enough room in here to actually put it in there, but I don't know, we'll see. We'll see once we get there. And I'm going to go ahead and cut off this pedal assembly so that I can weld it to the brake pedal here so that again the pedals will match all the way across. That's the idea anyway. Kind of a shame that I bought this whole assembly just to chop it all up, but honestly when you're doing stuff that's completely custom, what can you expect? Nothing's going to bolt on. There's a chance sometimes that you can make it work, but in this case there was just no chance, so cutting it up it is. Some good news here though, the pivot pin for the pedal assembly on the Challenger happens to be basically the exact same diameter as the pivot pin for the Chevy truck. So I just gotta ream out the center of this pin just the tiniest bit, and then this pedal will work great with this pin assembly. So that actually is some really good news. All right, so I think at a glance, this is what I'm going to take out of this piece right now. Now, when I cut this thing out, it's gonna make this thing really floppy. So after I add the extension for the clutch pedal, I'm gonna have to tie it back into the base back here and back here. That way it doesn't twist and flex on me. But I think once I do that, we should be in pretty good shape. I'm surprised it didn't take as much rigidity out of the piece as I thought it would, but that's actually really good news because I can just tie it in no problem. Looks like I'm gonna have to cut a fair bit more out of this thing. It's not allowing the pedal to come forward far enough, so I'm gonna have to take a little bit more off here. Like I said, we'll just keep shaving until we get it where we want it. So we're making some progress here. Got the third pedal in there. Look at that. So built this whole piece here. Now, this piece is way, way overbuilt. It did not need to be 3/16 steel, but that's basically what I had on hand, so that's what I built it out of. No big deal, got it in there. Got the spring mount in there, so it actually has some rebound to it, which is nice. As you can tell, we have a bit of a pedal clearance issue right now. So what I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna go ahead and chop off. Actually, I'm just gonna cut this pedal plate off, and then I'm gonna weld on the other style like this. And then for this one, I wanna go ahead and chop it here, and I wanna actually get this thing to come down and actually kick out the opposite way so it's over here a little bit. So that's the plan right now, but honestly, so far, it's going pretty well. I'm pretty happy with how it's coming out. So we are making some great progress on our updated pedal assembly here. We have the new clutch pedal all installed. I bent it the opposite way, welded that foot pad on, so all the pedals are basically set up. I also welded in a new pivot pin for the master cylinder to actually actuate from. Now, speaking of the master cylinder, I picked up this Willwood unit, just an eBay setup. I hope it works fairly decent. It's a 3/4 inch bore. Is that the correct size? I literally have no idea. I was trying to do some research on that. Tough to figure out the exact information on whether or not a 3/4 inch bore is going to be a good size. We are going to find out. However, what I needed to do is I created this pivot pin point here for it to mount onto the clutch pedal. And what I need to do is I need to make a transition between this size of rod, threaded rod, and this size of threaded rod. So basically I just took a piece of tube, drilled a hole through the center of it, welded a nut on each end that corresponded to that particular thread size. And now I have a little clevis pin here that actually connects to both sides. So I can actually adjust the length of this rod, shorter or longer, to fit exactly what I need. But then now the question is, how exactly am I going to fit this master cylinder to the Firewall? Now for the Firewall, I needed to get that clutch master cylinder on here somewhere. And as you can see, the brake booster itself mounts right here. And it's actually fairly tight to the Firewall. So I wasn't sure how I was gonna be able to get a clutch master cylinder to fit behind it. So what I did was I actually made this box assembly here that the master cylinder could mount to, and then that is recessed into the Firewall itself, and then I just welded that box into place. So now the whole clutch master cylinder can sit back about 3/4 of an inch further than it was, and it clears the brake master cylinder with no issue. I'll show you that. There we go. So as you can see, it mounts in there back far enough, but you can actually still get to your fitting that goes on the actual master cylinder itself, so that shouldn't be a problem. It bolts clearly, and what's really a special bonus about it is that even with the master cylinder bolted on there, there's still enough room to take the hydraulic master out, so that is pretty exciting. Here's a shot with the brake booster installed. You can see I have plenty of clearance here. Now for the master cylinder, you can also tell how it would have hit had I not made that recessed area for it. But like I said, what's really nice is even with the master cylinder or the brake booster still installed in there, there's enough room to wiggle that right on out of there. So serviceability is pretty good. Now also another component of this system is I will be using the electronic throttle from the Challenger pedal setup that I have. To mount this directly on the Firewall, it could have been fairly straightforward, just drill some new holes in the Firewall and mount it directly, but I wanted a little bit of an angle to it to make it sit properly. So what I did was I took the original gas pedal mount itself, chopped it all up, and built this bracket instead. Now you can see I drilled a hole here, so I can still run the factory hardware through here, here, and here. So this thing is very, very sturdy, but it mounts up the clutch pedal in a location that's more appropriate for it. So I'm actually really happy with this solution. It came out really, really nice, I think. And it's yet another reason why you don't want to throw anything away from the original vehicle as you're doing your build, because you never know what you could repurpose into something else. I am definitely not an advocate of pack ratting things. I don't keep things for 15, 20 years. I like to purge because I like things to be very clean. But in the case of a project car, it definitely helps to hold on to some of these older components for a little while, at least until that build is done and you can move on to the next. So overall, I feel like this clutch pedal assembly is going really, really well. I'm actually very happy with how it's turning out. I think it looks great inside the vehicle. However, I did fall victim to one of the oldest mistakes in the book, and that is make sure you have all the components you're going to need or use mocked into place as you're custom fabricating something. I just realized, don't know why I didn't think about it before, but I just realized that I built this entire setup without having the steering column in the truck. So without knowing where the column is, I can't exactly know where to put these pedals. So I have a good sense that I'm going to have to actually reshape the clutch pedal to make it fit in there. Hopefully that's all I have to do, and hopefully I don't have to rebuild a lot of the stuff that I've already done. But let's go ahead and get that column tossed in there, and then we can retest our actual pedal assembly and see how it fits. Oh man, I got lucky. This never happens to me, but with the column installed, it does not interfere with either of the pedals, so I don't have to change anything that I built up in there. That is a minor miracle. So you can see I adjusted the length of the rod for the clutch pedal so that it's at the exact same height as the brake pedal is. And then of course I've got the throttle pedal there. So all of a sudden this truck has gone from being a boring automatic to now it is a manual. One last step to our pedal box assembly here. Just went ahead and made this adjustable clutch stop on there. Keeps the clutch pedal travel from going too far. And like I said, I did make it adjustable so you can thread that rod in and out to change that. But our pedal box's assembly is essentially done now. We can take it all apart and paint this thing and get it installed. Now for the Firewall, I've been busy welding up any sort of holes that I'm not going to use. So I've been making some patch panels and covering up those holes. With this new swap, this engine swap, I'm actually not using a lot of these different holes that were in this Firewall. So I was able to go ahead and cover a lot of those various screw holes and things like that. This hole I'm still going to use for the PCM wiring because there is a factory PCM on this truck, so I'm just going to replace it with mine, still run the wiring through that hole. Other than that, the Firewall is pretty cleaned up and ready to go. I think we're going to paint it here within the next couple of days and try to get this thing just a nice satin black. Now, certainly I would love to take this thing down to not quite bare metal, but really get it stripped down and do a really, really nice covering on it. However, I just do not have the time. I'm trying to get this whole thing done within a 2-month time period. So for this build, I'm basically adhering to the David Freiberger school of thought, which is don't get it right, just get it running. So that's kind of what we're going to do. There's so much to do and so many tasks that have to be accomplished that doing like a full restoration on this thing just is not practical at this time. And I want to drive this thing anyway. I want it to be a nice driver that I can go out and just beat on and not really care too much about. So part of that is I'm basically just gonna, I've scuffed the Firewall and I'm gonna just fog it with some satin black paint, call it good. I mean, it's gonna chip, it's probably gonna peel a little bit, but the truth of it is the truck will run and drive, and that's what I need out of this thing. That way, if down the line I ever feel the need to really go through the truck and make a lot of things better, I can do that. But for right now, the time crunch we got, that's what's happening.
I don't know what you're saying, but that's what's going on, yeah.
So I basically got the whole entire front end of the truck stripped down. That's because I'm going to paint the Firewall, and I'm also going to paint the frame and the A-arms and things like that. So as you can see, I've got a lot of that front end stripped out of there, and it's also not really that clean. I'm just gonna blast it as best I can, maybe wipe it down with a rag, and then we're gonna shoot it with some paint. Now I just want to take a quick moment to talk about project cars. Now you may look at this truck and say, how on earth are you going to get that thing done in 2 months' time? Well, the reality is I might not. I'm really gonna push and do everything I can to actually get it done. I might miss that deadline. However, the part that I want to impart to you guys is that vehicles, even when they're heavily stripped down, aren't as far away as they look. It can be really demoralizing to look at something like this. I've got the whole front end gutted on this thing. It looks nothing like a truck whatsoever at all. And you can start to think in your head, this thing's never gonna go back together again, and it just gets you demoralized, and then you don't even work on it. And then what happens is a few years down the line, it still looks exactly the same, and you're more depressed than ever looking at it. You just want to get rid of it. You're tired of looking at it. You don't even want to think about it. If you put in a little bit of time, say even like an hour a day, I know that's kind of making the rounds right now, like an hour a day, go out there and just do something on the truck. Well, all of that adds up really quickly, more than you would think, to where stuff gets done little by little by little. And also, you've seen a lot of the projects I do on my channel where I have the cab off of these big trucks. Truck looks completely disassembled. I've got parts scattered everywhere. And you're like, how's that ever gonna go back together again? Well, then a day and a half later, it's all back together and running again. So it's just parts. It's not too big of a deal. Even when they look completely stripped down like this, they're not that far away from being a running, driving vehicle. So don't get demoralized. Just keep chipping away at it. Whatever time you have, even if it's like 20 minutes, half an hour, get out to your garage, wherever the vehicle is, in driveway, whatever, do something on it, something on your list that you know you can accomplish within that time period. Put in the time, even as little as you have, you'll get those things out on the road. our transmission here, I went ahead and purchased a full rebuild kit for it. Now, I know what you're thinking, that you do not have time for a rebuild, and you're absolutely right. I do not have time for a full rebuild on this thing, but I wanted some of that peace of mind, right? I didn't want to have to worry about this thing at all while I was on the trip. But the rebuild kit I got is really inclusive. Check it out. It comes with brand new synchros on there. It has new seals and new bearings. So by the time I'm done with this rebuild, I should have no concerns about this trans whatsoever. So if you'll excuse me, I gotta get to rebuilding this thing. Now the rebuilding process is a very delicate process. It's not one you want to rush, so take your time to get it right. Look at that, fully rebuilt. I think there might be a couple of runs in my rebuild job, but that's okay. All right, you guys, that's going to be it for this episode of the C10. I promise you there's a lot more C10 content coming soon. If you've liked what you've seen so far, please consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll see you next time on Reignited.